There are two ways for a system to handle a population it no longer finds economically useful. The first is to let them disappear quietly. I covered that in yesterday's episode. The second is to keep them alive just long enough to bill them dry. Bill the government dry and bill their families dry. Then dispose of them when the money runs out. And that's what this is all about. If you want to know why America refuses to build multi-generational housing, why it underfunds home care, why it isolates our elders, why it denies long-term disability support, and why it keeps the guardianship system intact. Also, it subsidizes institutional care instead of independence. The answer is not cultural, it's financial. There is no profit in elders living at home with their families. There is no profit in seniors dying peacefully in their own beds. And there is no profit in communities where the elderly remain integrated and accounted for. The profit begins when the elderly are removed from community, stripped of their autonomy, and placed under institutional control, converted into billable patients, and kept alive just long enough to extract every dollar from Medicaid, Medicare, private insurance, pension checks, families, frozen estates, reverse mortgages, and their life savings. And when the extraction ends, so does the care. See, there's a capture pipeline here. Isolate, capture, bill, drain, and dispose. And the pipeline isn't abstract. It's real. It's documented, and it's expanding. You see, elders are separated from supportive networks through housing displacement, forced downsizing, the death of or disappearance of their peers, reduced mobility, and transportation deserts. Isolated seniors don't need to resist. Once isolated, they become candidates for institutional custody through nursing homes, assisted living facilities, memory care units, conservatorships, guardianships, and public fiduciary arrangements. At this stage, the elder no longer controls where they live, what they eat, their money, their own medical decisions, or their legal rights. Control equals extraction access. Once captured, the billing begins. The system calls this length of stay optimization or reimbursement and efficiency, all sounding nice legalese words there. But what it means is simply as this: keep them alive long enough to bill Medicare and Medicaid, but not long enough to become unprofitable. This is why home care is being starved in our country today. It's cheap and it doesn't feed the industry. Institutional care is expensive and heavily subsidized. The same governments that claim they can't afford home care happily pay 4 to 6 times more to institutional vendors. Because the point isn't care here. The point is billing.
You might never need to buy prescription glasses again. This is Zoometra, a military-grade vision system designed to do what most consumer glasses.
And now we drain them. Once the elder's assets are identified, the draining begins. Pension checks are redirected, estates are frozen, homes are forced sold, reverse mortgages are triggered, insurance policies are liquidated, savings accounts are emptied, family members end up being billed, and Medicaid asset tests seize anything that's left over. And by the end of the typical institutional run, the elder dies with nothing. Zero wealth, zero handoff to the next generation, and zero intergenerational transfer. And this is not a bug here, guys. This is the business model. And I think you can see it for what it is. You see, once the money runs out, institutional patience runs out as well. At that point, you begin hearing phrases like higher level of care required, unfunded needs, placement transition, or end-of-life coordination, which are all polite ways of saying the billing phase is over. We're done here. That's the next frontier. Not robotics, not telehealth, and not smart cities. The next frontier is extraction through custody. Okay, so who profits from institutional extraction? Well, that's a good question. If you follow the money through the senior care industry as I have, you discover something strange. The people providing the care and the people profiting from the care are not the same entities. The hands that feed you are broke. The hands that bill you are rich. So let's take a look at this. Private equity figured out something brutal and brilliant here. Seniors are predictable. They are immobile. Seniors are billable. Seniors don't price shop. They don't complain publicly. And they don't move facilities once they're placed. And the government foots the bill. So private equity buys the facilities, sells the real estate to itself through shell subsidiaries, loads the operating company with debt, slashes staffing, slashes food budgets, slashes medical support, and then bills Medicaid at full freight. This has a name in the industry: financial optimization of care. But if you ask the nurses and the CNAs, and they'll tell you the real translation here. Profit is taken out of food, staff, and time. And the beauty of the model, for the investors that is that the victims don't leave reviews and they don't organize boycotts. They just decline, slowly and quietly. Now let's talk about the golden goose that Medicaid is. Nursing homes don't survive on Social Security checks. They survive on Medicaid reimbursements. Medicaid is the financial engine of the institutional care economy, and states know it. It's why home care support is underfunded, waiting lists for in-home assistance are lengthy or endless, aging in place programs are starved of funding, and family caregivers get pennies or nothing at all. Because if the seniors stay home, the institutions lose the golden goose. States pretend they can't afford home care, but have no problem paying 4 to 6 times more for institutional vendors, because the institutional vendors have the lobbying groups, political action committees, trade associations, legal teams, and state house relationships. But grandma doesn't. Now here's one of the more hideous aspects of this that I've discovered. The guardianship industry and custody has become a business model here. You see, when an elder loses capacity, courts decide who gets the custody. Most people assume the family gets custody, and this is increasingly untrue. For myself, I was fortunate when my dad had cancer and it got to that point in his life. I was awarded custody, and I was fortunate there, because a lot of people don't get that option. The court takes over, they apply a conservator, and hence the family member loses control over their own family. And because courts often assign professional guardians and conservators who take control of the bank accounts, the estates, the spending, the medical decisions, and can force property sales, and they can deny social access. and they can make all the end-of-life arrangements, locking the family out of those decisions. And then they have the gall to sell guardianship as protection. But in practice, it's often asset liquidation. Because once the guardian controls the checkbook, the elder becomes a funding source for the facility. Once the facilities control the care, the guardian becomes the billing gatekeeper for services. Families are then often reframed as interference or disruptive or non-contributing. And if you have experienced this, please tell me in the comments below, because I read each and every one of them. Because once you're labeled disruptive, access can be revoked under the guise of patient safety, which means the elder becomes both isolated and billable. Guardianship is not evil in theory, but in a captured ecosystem, neutrality becomes extraction. And I'm really against institutional guardianship. I think it's wrong, and to me it's just evil. But that's just my personal opinion here, guys. I think guardianship should be kept to the family level as much as possible. Now, facilities themselves are not the masterminds of the system. They are what I call the harvesters. Their role is to keep the body alive at the lowest possible overhead long enough to produce the maximum reimbursable billing. Because they cut the staffing ratio, therapy time, wound care, food quality, activities, medications, sanitation, social time, and emotional support. Because their goal is to isolate. But what they don't cut is the billing codes. You can have one CNA on a wing of 35 residents and still bill full freight for the skilled nursing, rehab, memory care, dementia support, and end of life. To the outsider, it looks like neglect. And I've covered this in my nursing home video. But to the industry, it's called margin optimization. Now let's talk about the sleeping referees here. The state theoretically enforces standards. But we all know state inspectors are understaffed, underfunded, overworked, captured by the industry, intimidated by legal teams, pressured by lobbyists, and politically disincentivized to shut anything down. Because if they shut down a facility, hundreds of residents must be relocated. Families must be contacted. Hospitals get the overflow. DHS gets flooded, and Medicaid must find replacements. Worst of all, the press starts to ask questions. And under capitalism, failure must be orderly. Suffering is easier to regulate than disruption. So what happens to elders who aren't profitable? Not theoretically here, and not morally, but economically. Well, that's where this goes. The most disturbing part of the system is not what happens to profitable elders. We already know what happens to them. They're warehoused, billed, and monitored until the accounts are empty. The real horror is what happens to the ones who cannot be monetized. Because for all the patriotic speeches about protecting seniors, the system does something chillingly consistent to unprofitable bodies. It abandons them, plain and simple, in a bureaucratic way. Abandonment in this system takes on about three forms. You have bureaucratic abandonment, and this looks like wait lists that never move, eligibility that never qualifies, paperwork that never processes, applications that expire before approvals, appeals that are denied without explanation, and referrals that go nowhere. Nobody pulls the trigger here, guys. They just stop pulling the person into the collective. Bureaucracies kill through attrition and medical abandonment. Once the money runs out, the language changes here. Instead of treatment plans, therapy schedules, and interventions, you begin hearing comfort measures, quality of life considerations, and palliative orientation. These aren't inherently bad concepts, mind you, but in an extraction model, they function as soft exits. Once the body is no longer billable, the industry loses interest in prolonging anything. And lastly, one of the worst is social abandonment here. This is the most devastating form because it doesn't kill the body, it kills the reason to keep living. The system isolates elders from family, community, identity, purpose, autonomy, separates them from their land, their history, and their routine.
Okay, Richardson, the holidays are done.
We thought so too, but then Verizon just gave us their best deal.
4 new iPhone 17s, all on them.
Get 4 iPhone 17s on us, no trade-in needed, and 4 lines for just $25 a line.
Love that spirit, folks!
So you're already using ChatGPT, and while that's awesome, there is one little problem. You're not making any money with.
You know, we can withstand enormous physical hardships, but we cannot withstand sustained meaningless. The industry knows this, and it isn't staged as a cruelty, it's staged as a liability minimization and staff efficiency here. Wandering residents are medicated. Exiting residents are locked in. Agitated residents are sedated. Lonely residents are just ignored. And depressed residents are somewhat documented. Not because the staff is evil, because there's not. We have a lot of great nurses and CNAs in the industry working in an evil system. But because the system is designed to optimize throughput and not love. Now here's a part nobody in policy circles really wants to talk about. When unprofitable elders die, the system treats it as closure, not a tragedy. Facilities call it bed availability. Medicaid calls it case resolved. Estate lawyers call it probate closed. Pension funds call it liability extinguished. And insurance companies call it claim terminated. Wall Street calls it a margin performance. Sounds familiar? I know you've heard these terms. But the family calls it a loss, and the system calls it reconciliation. So, what is the real purpose of institutional capture? Institutional care in America doesn't exist because elders are too fragile to remain in the world. It exists because the economy needs a controlled environment to harvest their remaining economic value, prevent them from becoming political, and prevent them from becoming visible, and prevent them from passing wealth downward. And this is the most important fact to consider here. Because intergenerational wealth transfer, even tiny wealth transfer, threatens the design. An elder who dies with a house intact creates a homeowner in the next generation. An elder who dies with savings intact creates a cushion in the next generation. An elder who dies with property intact creates a landowner in the next generation. And that undermines the entire debt, labor, housing pipeline. So the system created a new sequence here. Isolate, capture, bill, drain, and dispose. This is not health care in America. This is not safety, and this sure as hell is not dignity. This is custodial finance. And custodial finance is the extraction frontier for a society that cannot let workers keep wealth, even at the very end. If you grew up in America, you were taught that aging ends in retirement, rocking chairs, grandkids, and stories. And that was the cultural script. But the economic script here is very different. Work until you break, extract until you're empty, store you until you're billable, and disappear you when the account closes. I know it sounds harsh, guys, because we still carry the myth that elder care is about compassion. But myths are expensive, and America stopped paying for expensive myths a long time ago. Once the post-war retirement dream collapsed, once pensions died, once wages stagnated, and Social Security came under attack, and home ownership became a luxury instead of a baseline, the question facing the state wasn't, how do we care for our elders? It became, where do we put them? And putting is the key word here. Because we didn't build communities, we built containers. And we didn't build networks, we built facilities. And we didn't build support, we built custody. If you want to know what a society values, look at where it stores the people who can't make money anymore. We store them in places that maximize billing and minimize interruption. We store them out of view so the myth of independence can continue unchallenged.
My TikTok brain rot nephew ordered this weird-looking plasma lighter, and what happened next was an absolute embarrassment. I'm a wilderness survival veteran, and the last thing I'd ever use is an electric lighter. They're complete trash.
And we store them under legal structures that protect the institution, not the individual here. And we store them in buildings where time is counted in reimbursement cycles, not in seasons. And the system calls that compassion. All right, here's my final part. Here's the part no investor prospectus or Medicaid budget ever counts on. Humans do not go quietly from community to captivity without leaving a mark here. Even in their 80s, even in wheelchairs, even with tremors in their hands, elders remain dangerous to the system for one simple reason here. Elders remember how things used to work. They remember when housing wasn't financialized. They remember when wages could support a family. They remember when neighbors watched each other's kids. They remember when food grew in actual soil instead of logistics chains. They remember when people retired at 62 instead of dying on the job at 72. And they remember when land wasn't a speculative asset, but something that could be handed down to their sons and daughters. And they remember when dignity didn't require paperwork. You see, the real threat here is not that elders are expensive. It's that they are witnesses. Witnesses to a time before the extraction economy. Witnesses to a time before debt became mandatory. And witnesses to a time when survival wasn't a subscription service. And witnesses tell stories. Stories create memories. Memory creates compassion. And comparison creates dissatisfaction. Dissatisfaction creates rebellion. And rebellion is bad for business. So we isolate the witnesses, we capture the witnesses, we build the witnesses, we drain the witnesses, and then we dispose of the witnesses. Politely, clinically, economically. No villain required here, only incentives. But here's where this story pivots. Every collapse in history ends with the same realization, guys. People only needed the system as long as they believed they couldn't build something else. And that brings us to the most dangerous idea in this entire erasure economy. Interdependence is the escape hatch here. Not isolation, not self-reliance, and not prepper individualism, but interdependence. The one thing the system can't regulate. They can't bill it, and they can't easily prevent it. If extraction is the frontier for institutions, then interdependence is the frontier for us citizens. And that's where we're going to go next. I hope you've enjoyed today's episode, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. If you have not had a chance to subscribe to the channel, please take a moment to do so. It'd really help out. Thanks for tuning in today, and I'll see you next time. Let's rise together.